I'm going to go ahead and get started by talking about news that I was not expecting today. So you may have heard this morning, but the Supreme Court issued its ruling already on a case involving a charter school, a religious charter school in Oklahoma. And I'll get to what they said and what it means in a little bit. But I thought it might be helpful to talk a little bit about what was at stake here. What is this ruling even about? Because I don't know if everyone has a good understanding of what this case was even about. So this case involved a school in Oklahoma called the St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School. Long name for something pretty simple, which is that this is a private Catholic school that said, we're a charter school, so give us taxpayer money to fund and run our Catholic school. This is basically what they wanted to do with it. I would argue the only reason they even set it up is because they wanted to test the boundary of whether public money could go toward their private Catholic school. And so, long story short, they wanted to open this up. Ryan Walters, the superintendent of public instruction in Oklahoma, helped make it happen. And they got this thing through. And for all intents and purposes, this charter school was ready to open last year, and they were going to get public money to do it because Oklahoma has a system where they use taxpayer money for charter schools. But there were multiple lawsuits to try to stop that from happening. The one that actually made it far is one filed by none other than Oklahoma's Attorney General, Gentner Drummond, who is hardcore Republican, but also weirdly on the side of church-state separation. So that guy filed a lawsuit with the state Supreme Court saying you got to put a stop to this. And the Oklahoma Supreme Court said 7-1, yeah, we do need to put a stop to this. They said Oklahoma's Constitution has a rule that says public money cannot go toward religion, endorsing religion, promoting religion. So yeah, this totally violates our state constitution. And just to go a little further into that, it's not just that it's money going to a Catholic school. This is a school that would not require teachers to be certified. They would not have to accept openly LGBTQ teachers. They could explicitly promote Catholicism during school hours. If you are a student who happens to get pregnant, they could expel you. If you were a student who was transgender, they could expel you because, according to the Catholic Church, you don't exist. And, they're not going to teach you the things you would expect from a public school, like sex education, for example. And you have to wonder whether this school would have the resources to take on kids with special needs. So this is not this was not just a charter school that happened to be Catholic. This was a Catholic school that wanted to take public funding. You know what I mean? And so after the Oklahoma State Supreme Court shot it down, before that was the final word, a bunch of right-wing groups asked the U.S. Supreme Court to step in because they said that denying this school funding violated their First Amendment rights. They said, and I'm quoting from an article here, that the state Supreme Court ruling unconstitutionally punished the free exercise of religion by disqualifying the religious from government aid. But again, it's not that this happened to be a Catholic school doing secular things. This was a Catholic school that wanted to do Catholic things. So they don't get taxpayer money to pull that off. This didn't seem complicated. And a lot of groups, including the Attorney General of Oklahoma, urged the Supreme Court, just don't take up this case. We're good. There is no controversy here. You don't need to step in. Just back off. And they're right. I mean, the Supreme Court had no good reason to interfere here. The school intended to promote religion. The state's constitution says you can't do that with public money. So that was the end of the story. Why would you step in if there's no controversy? And then this past January, the U.S. Supreme Court said, oh, we're totally taking up this case. And that was not great news, because why would they want to take up this case that isn't even controversial and is totally settled law unless they wanted to undo that? You know what I mean? Now, one of the interesting things about this case, and stick a pin in this, it'll matter later, is that Amy Coney Barrett said, I am not going to participate in this case. And while she didn't explain why she wasn't participating, it turns out, as reporters figured out, she is close friends with the law professor who happened to be advising the Catholic school. So for the sake of optics, she said, I don't want to appear biased, so I'm not going to involve myself in this case. But you have to think, there are still 5 conservatives on this Supreme Court and only 3 liberals, so who cares if Amy Coney Barrett wasn't on here? So now we cut to later on. This was when? In March? I think they argued this case. I'm going to try to jump. Oh, I'm sorry. They argued this case in April. And what was scary is when you listen to the oral arguments of this case, every reporter I know who covers legal cases was like, well, that didn't look good. I want to show you one of them. This is from Vox, Ian Millhiser. This is how he put it at the time. The religious right is headed toward a revolutionary victory. And what Millhiser was basically saying is nothing, the questions the conservative justices were asking were not the sort of questions you would expect if they were going to rule in favor of the state. This is interesting. Brett Kavanaugh asked if the court now has a different constitutional understanding of whether church and state is even permitted. That new understanding is this: so long as an American can choose not to participate in state-backed religious operation, church and state don't need to be separate. Well, that's frightening. Like, just because they're not forcing you to go to the Catholic school, therefore it's legal? That sounds horrible. And look at what Millhiser said. Kavanaugh's new regime would mandate a great deal of state funding for religious schools as long as you have a choice about where to send your child. Like, that's not great. Brett Kavanaugh clearly is not on our side. There was another thing here, too. Elena Kagan spent much of the argument trying to draw out the implications of how this would even work if they ruled in favor of the school. What if a religious charter school doesn't want to educate kids who don't share the school's faith? Well, unlike a public school, they could just say no. Or suppose that a religious charter school wanted to toss out state curricular standards altogether. She brought up the example of an Orthodox Jewish yeshiva where instruction would focus almost entirely on the Talmud, to the exclusion of topics like math and English. Would taxpayers be required to fund this school as well? And she's right to ask all these questions, because if you allow funding to support one religious school with taxpayer funding, why can't any other religious school just say, hey, we're a charter school now, you have to give us access to the public coffers? And that's what she was getting at. But you expect her to do it because she's a good justice. And this is how Ian Millhiser finished up this piece. The court's rulings in these cases will come in the next few months, but for now, it appears the Republican justices' religious conservative revolution is likely to march onward, remaking public schools and potentially many other public institutions. So that was scary. And I'm only pointing out that article to say that's kind of what everyone took away from that case. The conservative justices did not suggest they were going to vote any way other than in favor of this school. And then, and I know this is what you all may have seen this morning, the Supreme Court issued its ruling. And the weird thing is, it was short and it was quick. And this is it right here. Let me show this to you. This is all they put out there. And you can see all of these lawsuits were just boiled up into one. Look at sentence 2 first. Judge Barrett took no part. Yeah, we know that. She wasn't involved in this. But then sentence 1, the judgment is affirmed by an equally divided court. They're saying the Oklahoma Supreme Court that said no to the Catholic charter school, that decision stays in place. Why? Because there was a 4-4 split between the other justices. And that is kind of shocking, because that means one of those conservatives decided to go with the liberals. Now, who was it? According to this decision, we don't actually know. It was clearly John Roberts. Like, he's the only possibility here, but he doesn't explain why. So keep that in mind. Like, I don't know why John Roberts decided to go with the liberals on this one. He's done it a couple times in the past where he just sides with the liberals on random cases here and there. And in this case, he didn't explain himself. Like, I don't know if he did it because he just feels Oklahoma is correct. The Oklahoma Supreme Court was correct to do this. Maybe he did it because there's no controversy. Maybe he knows that if you allow this school to get funding, it's going to mean that across the country, all these religious schools are going to demand access to taxpayer funding in similar ways. So I wish we knew his reasoning, but we don't. Still, that means for now, St. Isidore doesn't get to open. I think they were super excited to open up this fall. They're not going to get to do that. This thing is dead for now. So then the question is, okay, well, where do they go from here? Because even though this is an unexpectedly good thing, and I want to point out this too. When you have a Supreme Court that has an ultra-conservative supermajority, you know they're almost never going to do the right thing. The best you can hope for is that they just do no harm. So the best thing that happens is the Supreme Court does not take up the case you're worried about. Or maybe there's a weird split and they dismiss it because maybe someone didn't have standing, so they decide not to weigh in. Because when this court weighs in, especially on culture war issues, it's almost never good news. The Supreme Court is the enemy of the people right now. It usually is, historically speaking. But very rarely in our nation's history has the Supreme Court been the side of goodness. Almost always, the decent judges are in the minority. So in this case, they took the path of least harm. They just said, it's split, so the earlier decision stays. But here's what's going to happen now. Maybe St. Isidore tries again. And maybe they try to ask the state for permission to get public funding again as a charter school. And maybe they get another yes from the charter school board. And maybe there's another lawsuit to try to stop it and it gets back up here. Or more likely, maybe another charter school, maybe another religious school in another state demands to be treated like a charter school. And they just play this game again. This is how the right works. They just try to figure out, how can we get this case back up to the Supreme Court? Same basic facts, but this time we'll make sure Amy Coney Barrett's friend is not involved at all. Because that's really all they have to do. Just get this case, get some school approved for federal funding. Someone's going to sue over it, and we will just appeal that thing all the way to the Supreme Court. And you got to feel confident, if you're a conservative, that even if you lost John Roberts for reasons unknown, you probably have Amy Coney Barrett on your side. So all you need is another case to make this work, and then the whole thing blows up again. So this is a temporary reprieve. It's great news. It's unexpected, but it is what everyone hoped for, which is that the Supreme Court would not weigh in. But every church-state separation organization I know is basically saying, this is great, but also we know damn well this is not the last word on the topic. They will try this again. They always try these things again. So, be vigilant. It's going to happen. But for now, with one sentence, the Supreme Court kind of shocked a lot of the people who follow everything it does, because they fully expected the conservatives to, break the dam when it came to public funding of religious schools, and they didn't yet. And, you never know what's going to happen with the makeup of the court a year from now. It could change, probably for the worse, but it could change, so you never know what happens. So anyway, shocking result today. If you have any questions, happy to hear them right now. Let's see what you got here. I'm glad she followed her ethical obligation to recuse herself. Can't say the same for some other justices. Yeah, Clarence Thomas is not about to recuse himself from anything. Alito will not recuse himself from just about anything. So, yay. You don't have to give credit where it's due to Amy Coney Barrett. She did the bare minimum. But, okay, great. I'm glad for once someone in the Trump orbit decided optics matter. And maybe this would be a bad look if she stayed involved in this case. This very close call should scare the living crap out of all of us. The fact that it didn't pass is what's scary. The fact that it almost did is terrifying. Yeah, this is a very important point. This was a very clear-cut case of church-state separation. Should you use public money to fund a private Catholic school that wants to call itself a charter school, but acts like a Catholic school in terms of how they operate? And this is church-state separation 101. This is not like a trolley problem question you get on the final where, wow, there's a lot of nuance involved. No, there isn't. This is very clear-cut violation of church-state separation. This should have been an 8-0 decision. The fact that it is 4-4 is not great news because it means 4 justices are ready to just ignore church-state separation forever. That is scary. The fact that this celebration is happening is a celebration of the fact that the Supreme Court decided we're not going to do anything. And that is reason for celebration. It could have been worse. You should not have 4 people on the Supreme Court that sees this as anything other than clear-cut church-state separation. So yes, that is scary. You're totally right. No written decision for a 4-4 split and no formal voting announcement. Roberts voted no. Yep, I mean, I showed you the entire ruling. It's very short, and the assumption is Roberts is the one who flipped because none of the other justices, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, they did not suggest anything in oral arguments that made anyone think they would be on the other side of this. Roberts tends to play devil's advocate, but you kind of know where he's going to go, and it turns out he went the opposite direction this time. Probably. They're just going to find a case Barrett won't recuse herself from. That's correct. Yep, I agree. That is what they're going to do. And they're going to try to get this type of case right back up to the court. It's how they work.